Well, while we wait, I can present myself in the meantime, and I'm really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me for, I think, the third time, maybe, and for the second time in Plovdiv. My name is Jason Nardy. I'm from Florence in Italy, where I am working with several groups, collectives, organizations, networks at different levels to change our economy. How? Well, I'll give you some examples throughout this presentation, but I wanted to show you a short video before. It's like a minute and a half, if we can do it. I was able to listen to the last two speakers, and I'm well, quite in line, I would say, with what was said. I feel that today we have to start from our daily lives, but from understanding and going deeper in what we do, and through that we can realize that we have hope if we believe that we have hope. Yes, we might be a cancer for the earth, but there are possibilities of naturally sort of healing at least part of these cancers, if we have the time. That's right. So we don't have much time. And we got the movie.
The economic, environmental, social, and political crises are interdependent. They feed back into each other and are part of a whole. Climate change, poverty, social discrimination, authoritarianism, everything is interrelated. Violence against women's bodies is similar to the violence that is exerted on nature. Racism, homophobia, and xenophobia are strengthened by the processes of exclusion that foster globalization. Patriarchy and colonialism feed back into one another. Productivism and anthropocentrism reinforce each other. To face the systemic crises, we need systemic alternatives. Building systemic alternatives requires confronting capitalism, extractivism, productivism, patriarchy, plutocracy, and anthropocentrism. The construction of systemic alternatives requires the complementarity of different visions. Vivre bien, degrowth, ecofeminism, the commons, deglobalization, the rights of Mother Earth, and many others. To change the system, it is essential to see the future with multiple eyes.
Okay, so that was a very, very quick perspective with a lot of isms and a lot of visions and theories behind and analysis, etc. That mainly what this wants to express is that we can only change things if we see the connectedness amongst them, amongst the problems, and also the solutions. So if we want to transform the economy, we have to transform ourselves, we have to work to build and strengthen community, and then we have to look at the global issues that are happening. Can we go ahead now? Let's see if it works. Yes. So, today we get a lot of messages about how the world is on fire. in many different ways. The Amazon, the biggest lung of our planet, is burning, as well as forests in California and Indonesia and many other places. But there's also people that have started to react for a long time, but today it's becoming more and more of an intergenerational phenomenon. And in Chile these days, in Lebanon, Iraqi, in Haiti, in Catalonia, in Hong Kong, people are occupying the squares, not just to protest against a single thing, but because they are realizing that the problem is more systemic. I don't know if you can see the picture really here because the lighting is okay, but this is from the protest in Santiago in Chile just a few weeks ago, sparked by the fact that the government raised the ticket of the bus of 30 pesos, but the issue is not the 30 pesos. It's the 30 years of neoliberal policies that have destroyed a communal system and privatized most of the services that before were available to the Chilean people. So now we have millions of people demonstrating in the squares, and that has made a difference. The government had to go back in what it said, and the people insisted, saying it's not just one measure of policy. It's the many different things. It's the fact that in Chile, water is private. And that means that where people cannot afford it, or in the small villages, etc., it's not in the interest of a private company to bring it or to maintain it, so they won't do it. And prices go higher, etc., and it becomes unsustainable. I took an example on the other extreme, if you want, which is of the construction of the building of a new form of society. And doing this in a period of global crisis, but specifically in a place, in a territory that has been in crisis and war for many years, is even more challenging. And yet, the people in this small stripe of land, squeezed in between Turkey and Syria and Iraq, are doing miracles in challenging the status quo, challenging the way we imagine modern societies, and building day to day a different way of being together. Now, the idea is to have a society which is egalitarian, built on cooperative work and on mutuality, multicultural, and with a feminist perspective. Rojava is, in Kurdish, means Western land. It's part of the Kurdistan land that doesn't exist, but it's an autonomous region that was declared such in 2014 with the collapse of Iraq and the war in Syria. So it was a very special opportunity to be able to carve out this, not independence, but sort of a autonomy in which the state could not intervene to block it continuously, but at the same time, without seeking to build another nation or another independent state. And as a matter of fact, one of the characteristics of Rojava is that it's not just Kurdish, it's built with different people from Syria, from the Arab countries, etc. And there is the whole, let's say, practice that is behind it is based on communalism. That is, building communities, municipalities that are autonomous, self-governed, with councils, communal councils, where they decide everything together. And if something goes wrong, they try to solve it together. For instance, if a house is damaged, it's the whole village that rebuilds it. It's not contracted to someone to be rebuilt. And if they have to take certain decisions, they have city councils where the whole population participates. And the model is a confederative model, so that people, all these communities, constitute a confederation that works together. And the particular characteristic, I think, is the fact that there's a strong work that comes from the women that participate very actively in the public social life. As a matter of fact, they created this term genealogy, from gene, which means woman in Kurdish, which is the idea that the homo economicus, the economic man, is not at the central actor of society, the public actor that decides, but it's actually the caring economy, the caring aspect that comes from the tradition and the practice of women. And of course, it's an egalitarian society, so it's not replacing women with men, but it's changing the perspective in which you live together. But now, with what happened very recently, the American government giving the green light to the Turkish army to reoccupy that land and to create a cushion between Syria and Turkey, and giving back power to Assad, the government of Syria, etc. This whole experience risks not to be able to go ahead. So here I'm concerned with a fact. In the title I put solidarity economy because that's my domain. The idea that to create a new economy, it has to be based on mutualism, on cooperation, instead of on individualism and competition. It has to be based on a strong solidarity that is very democratic. It's not the kind of solidarity where one stronger party helps or assists a weaker one. It's a form of solidarity where there's a mutual recognition and a mutual help. And that is how we fight inequalities and obtain justice, if we fight for an equal society. So we have to change this pyramid that is at the basis of our economic system. It's a patriarchal society where economy is only the productive part that can be measured with a value that is determined by labor and GDP, the gross national product. Everything else that's below that is not even recognized, but it's actually the biggest part of the work that sustains society. So how do we invert or change this model of economy and make the invisible part visible and the main part of the economy? Well, we have to start by looking back at what are our needs and not base our economy on a fake demand and a productive kind of model. So that, first of all, by recognizing our needs, we know what solutions we need. And then we find the way to create an economy that works for those solutions. And here, there's many, many alternatives. And we're already building them. They exist, they're not just theory. They're actually the opposite. Instead of starting with isms and with models, we start with practices and with experiments, and then we build on top of them, and we see what is successful, and we mix them, and we adapt them, and we see in the different contexts how they can work or not work. We have a plural vision of different economies that can work. We start with food usually, local food chains. How do we reorganize our food production in a way that the production and the distribution are disintermediated as much as possible, and that you know where the food comes from, who has made it, what the story is behind it, etc. And you have consumer groups that are aware and that work with the producers, and that's how you come to have forms of community-supported agriculture and similar ones, etc., etc. There are many different ones. I will give you some examples in the next ones. But what are the characteristics of a future-capable economy in a post-growth society? First of all, we have to relocalize production. The globalization of production has created huge supply chains that are totally unsustainable, because most of the costs are externalized. So they're not in the price that you pay. And you pay so little for stuff that comes from the other side of the world, because all those, what we call externalities, the impact that they have on health, on the environment, etc., are not calculated in the price. If they were, you could not afford them. We have to have more self-managed forms of enterprises, shared ownership, think in an ecosystemic way, so not just your little part, but how that is part of a more complex system, very community-rooted. What do I contribute to the community? What can I get from the community? And democratic, co-constructive, in the public interest. So all of these things are characteristics that make a different form of economy. I will go very quickly through some of these, but I'll leave the presentation, so maybe some can inspire you. But we're going from a sectorial vision of the economy, where you have the private, public, and non-profit or third sector economy, to a way of doing economy which hybridizes all of these together. And we want to go from the extractive, linear, and destructive form of economy to a resilient, regenerative, and more circular form of economy. These are all things that we're now more used to hear, but not yet to practice. So we need to get more in the practical part of it. And why do we talk about solidarity economy as an ecosystem? Because we're looking at changing structural parts of the modern economy. One is that we cannot have commodification of the commons, of some very basic things like nature, land, labor, money, and knowledge. Knowledge is now more and more privatized, and we need to free it. We need to clean it as well. But the same thing happens with money. Think about the last announcement of Facebook, creating a worldwide global currency linked to Facebook called Libra, which could become the dominant currency with no control from any public or institutional body or democratic body. So it would be a private currency that millions and millions of people would use, but there's no control over it. We also have to redesign our cities that have been designed on this consumerist form of economy. And we have to regenerate our countryside, which have also been extensively and intensively used for this form of economy. Whereas today we have the science of agroecology, which has the wisdom of tradition and also innovation of the studies and of the knowledge that has come in the latest years. So, networking is the key. Each one can work how and as much as they can, but on our own we cannot change that much. We can have an impact, but it's different. So networking is the key to work together. And you can do it in different forms of groups, from organized consumers to platform of producers. We're talking about economy, right? To different forms of mutualistic and solidarity finance that are linked and work with the previous ones, to forms of neighborhood economy, community economy. You can have a community cooperative that manages commons in like a common building, like a park, like a street, like a service. And then you go up, not vertically, but in this networking kind of way, to different levels of territorial extension. So you may have a regional network of networks, a national platform, intersectorial networks that bridge together different ones. Here I have lists of names that you probably won't recognize, but each one is a network of a different group. For instance, we can have sectorial networks of universities or of fair trade or of community-supported agriculture. We can have intersectorial ones that bring some of these together. We can have local authorities that promote a different economy that network together. And there are several of these that are working now. And then we expand to continental and global levels. And finally, there is some legal recognition of these different forms, although in many countries these framework laws are still tied to the third sector kind of mentality. So let's see a few examples. I don't know how many, 3 minutes maybe I have left? Tell me? Okay, so recreating the food supply through agroecological, permacultural, etc. Things. In my town in Florence, 7 kilometers from my home, there is a place called Mondeggi. It's a big land, it's about 170 hectares. It's public land. It was given in concession. It's the one below, but I don't think you can see it with the slide. It was given in concession to a private farm, which what we call traditional, but it's intensive forms of cultivation, and they failed. They went bankrupt. So for several years, 5 or 6 years, the whole land was abandoned, and a group of students from the agriculture university occupied that land, especially 2 or 3 of the farms, and started practicing permaculture, etc., as a form of protest, because the state wanted to sell this land because it wasn't productive anymore. And they said, no, this is everybody's land, it's a commons, we cannot sell it out, we have to use it in the proper way. And created a movement with the consumer groups, with a lot of citizens living nearby, and starting to do activities. So now, if you want, you can adopt 40 olive trees and learn how to cultivate them and be part of the activities that maintain them in a natural way. And then you get oil that you share with everybody who has participated in this activity. So Mondeggi has been always illegal in some way, until very recently, when we created several groups in the city, an association of Friends of Mondegi, and we're proposing to the public institution to take care, together with those who have done it until now, of this public commons. Now this is tied with the idea of a peri-urban regeneration of production and consumption, because there's a lot of what they produce, they then bring to farmer markets in the city, and we had none up to 4 or 5 years ago. Now we have 4, and it's creating a different culture, little by little. Same thing is happening with food co-ops. Food co-ops are not something extremely new. I mean, we've had cooperatives selling food for many, many years. Some have become market cooperatives, so nothing much left of the cooperative nature, except maybe that they have a membership base. But some have rethought the model, actually from a New York very successful experience in Brooklyn. And the one in France that I visited, La Louve, is, I think, now 4 years old. It's a group of citizens that associated together, created this store. It's a little supermarket where they work together to choose which producers they involve. And the difference with other forms where you just employ some people in the cooperative and then you have the members who benefit from this, is that the members themselves have to work in the cooperative for half a day a month. And that reduces the cost of work because it's a contribution. And you have almost 1,000 of them alternating and keeping this thing going. It's in a very popular and multi-ethnical neighborhood of Paris, and it's been working really, really well. But then you have other examples. In Greece, during the austerity period, but still now, they created networks of solidarity pharmacies and clinics. When the hospitals were abandoned by the state, because they could not pay the people, the doctors and the workers anymore, these people took them voluntarily and created a different system for health. And I'm finishing up. You can do the same thing with energy. Renewable energy co-ops made by the consumers who become producers at the same time. So I become a member of a renewable energy co-op and I buy the energy from it. I'm at the same time a consumer and a producer. You create social markets where you bring together all these different forms of alternative economy. You add on this the finance, because you cannot go and have a beautiful, let's say, alternative economy system and then rely on the traditional banking. So it's possible, and we have now throughout Europe many ethical alternative banks financing cooperatives, mutualistic forms that are expanding more and more. Insurances, etc. And last thing, almost last thing, alternative currencies. Why? Because you can control the alternative currency and it can become a way of enhancing a local economy. So those who participate in a local economy can create their own currency for exchanges amongst each other. And there are thousands of examples, some more successful, some less successful, but now with the new technologies, you don't need to print these. You have them all on your phone, and it's much more transparent and easier to manage with blockchain, etc. And finally, given the context of Empathiste, I thought that it would be interesting to just mention the fact that in the art and culture field, the peer-to-peer production, the smart cooperatives, the cooperative platforms, and many other forms of collective work in culture and art are becoming more and more practiced. And some of the networks like UFIS, which is a French federation of cultural producers, from circuses to artists of all different kinds, is working a lot on this issue. So it might be interesting for some of you to get to know and get in contact with them. So there's many other examples, but there's no more time. So thanks a lot, and I hope you got some idea.